She drove straight through my gate like it was a suggestion, not a welded, steel-reinforced boundary I paid $3,000 to install. I stood on my porch, toothbrush still in my mouth, foam dribbling down my chin, watching as her candy apple-red Escalade plowed over the bent panels like a monster truck at a demolition derby. No warning. No apology. Just a rev of the engine and a screech of tires as she whipped into her driveway like a fast and furious villain on Xanax. The kicker? This wasn't even her entrance. Her driveway was on the other side of the cul-de-sac. But apparently, my property was now her shortcut because turning around is just so inefficient. Her words, not mine. I spat out my toothpaste, stared at the mangled mess that used to be my gate, and wondered what kind of person bypasses roadways and social contracts in one move. Then, like clockwork, Karen emerged from her SUV in full suburban warlord regalia, oversized sunglasses, tight yoga pants, and a designer windbreaker that still had the tag on. She glanced at my ruined gate like it was an unfortunate pothole in her shopping mall parking lot. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but she beat me to it with a perfectly practiced smile and a voice that dripped with condescension. "You really should have told the HOA before putting up that thing," she said, as if my legally permitted gate was some rogue military installation. It blocked the community flow. Karen had recently appointed herself Community Flow Coordinator, a position that existed only in her imagination and weekly next-door posts. Somehow, in her mind, this gave her the right to regulate traffic patterns, lawn colors, and whether I could own a barbecue smoker that produced excessive man smell. I didn't respond. I just stared at the tire tracks in my lawn, the shattered metal, and the smug curve of her lips. This wasn't a one-time accident. It was the culmination of months of escalating absurdity. First, she complained that my porch light was too emotional. Then she tried to report me for owning a bird feeder because seed attracts socialist pigeons. But today? Today she crossed a literal and metaphorical line. I calmly took a photo of the damage, nodded silently, and walked back inside. I could have yelled. I could have called the cops or the HOA board, though those clowns folded to her like origami every time she whined. But I didn't need noise. I needed patience. And a welder. The next morning, I started sketching blueprints. I work in industrial security systems, designing fortified entryways for data centers and pharmaceutical facilities. Think airlocks, pressure sensors, anti-tailgating lasers. I once built a sliding steel barrier that could stop a runaway forklift dead. So when it came time to replace my gate, I didn't just rebuild, I upgraded. On the outside, it looked identical to the old one, sturdy, innocuous, with faux rust finishes to match the rural vibe of the neighborhood. But inside? Inside was a symphony of passive-aggressive engineering. The new gate was spring-loaded, pressure-triggered, and could slam back shut the moment a car passed through it, without damaging my own property. It wasn't meant to injure. Just trap. Once her Escalade nosed through again, she'd find herself inside a narrow corridor of steel fencing, blocked from both ends. No wiggle room. No escape. The only exit would be through the small pedestrian gate on the side, which locked from my phone. And on top of that gate? A camera. Not for security. For documentation. I wanted every twitch of her entitled expression preserved in high-def glory. It took me a week to finish installation. During that time, I left the broken gate down and strung up caution tape, not because it was dangerous, but because Karen hated visual clutter. I saw her taking photos and emailing someone every morning. Probably her cousin on the HOA board, deputy administrator of grass uniformity, or whatever. I didn't care. Let them seethe. Let them believe I'd surrendered. Then came Saturday morning. I was sipping coffee on the porch when I heard it, the familiar growl of Karen's engine as it barreled around the bend. She didn't slow down. She didn't even glance at me. Just like last time, she plowed over the lawn and into my newly installed gateway, right on cue. The front half of her SUV made it through. The rest? Not so lucky. With a satisfying mechanical wham, the gate slammed shut behind her. Locked. Sealed. She was caged in like a luxury brand rhino at a suburban zoo. I watched from the porch as she realized what happened. First came the confusion, her head whipping back and forth between the gates. Then the horn. One honk. Two. Long, angry blasts meant to summon minions or shift the laws of physics. I just raised my mug and gave her a slow salute. She tried reversing, nothing. The back gate didn't budge. Then she tried opening her door to step out, only to discover the corridor was so tight, she couldn't even squeeze her yoga-toned frame between the SUV and the steel. Her face turned the color of strawberry yogurt left in the sun. She rolled down the window and shrieked my name like she was summoning a butler. I didn't move. Instead, I grabbed my phone and tapped the camera app. The video feed showed her full meltdown in real time, yelling into the mirror, pounding the steering wheel, calling someone, probably her HOA lackeys, and then, finally, crawling out the sunroof like a panicked possum in Lululemon. I unlocked the side gate just long enough for her to stomp out. She marched straight toward me, finger raised, voice wobbling with rage and confusion. "You're going to pay for this. This is entrapment. Illegal confinement. I know lawyers." I smiled and took another sip. "You broke onto my property. Twice. There's footage. Tire marks. An invoice for the original damage. And now? You're trespassing on camera while throwing a fit in front of half the neighborhood. I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself any more." Karen froze. She looked over her shoulder. Sure enough, a few neighbors had come out to investigate the honking. Phones were already up. One guy was filming vertically. Rookie mistake, but the look of gleeful vindication on his face was priceless. Karen adjusted her sunglasses, muttered something about mental health issues, and slithered back toward the side gate. Before she left, she turned back with one last threat. "You'll regret this." But the way her voice cracked, the way she was blinking fast like she couldn't believe any of this was happening, told me something important. She already did. The very next day, a letter appeared in my mailbox. Not from Karen, of course, but from the HOA. I knew it before I even opened the envelope because the handwriting on the front was perfectly centered, the return address was typed in bold font. Who does that? And it reeked of perfume that could only be described as boardroom desperation. I took the letter inside, sat down with a fresh mug of coffee, and unfolded it like it was a telegram from the enemy front. It was a cease and desist order. Not legal. Not binding. Just the kind of passive-aggressive stationary warfare the HOA loved to engage in. According to the letter, I was in violation of several community flow statutes, none of which existed when I moved in. Apparently, my new gate was an obstruction to the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony and vehicular tranquility. Vehicular tranquility. That was an actual phrase in the letter. I laughed out loud. Karen must have lobbied hard to get that one in. To escalate matters, the letter was signed not by the HOA president but by Acting Security and Transportation Liaison, a title that, again, had never existed until Karen probably invented it while sipping a mimosa in her hot tub. Below the signature was a typed addendum in parentheses. "We strongly advise you to remove the new gate within 5 days or face further action." I imagined Karen dictating those words from her yoga mat while glaring at her vision board. I didn't respond. Instead, I did what any rational, long-game-playing homeowner would do. I made copies. I scanned the letter, highlighted the absurd parts, and posted it anonymously on the neighborhood group chat. Within 2 hours, reactions poured in. Some were the usual suspects defending the HOA like it was a sacred constitutional entity. But more than a few neighbors chimed in with their own Karen horror stories. One neighbor described how she got fined for having her Halloween decorations up, past seasonal expiration. Another said Karen once reported their garden gnome as a gateway to satanic imagery. Apparently, her crusade for community flow had been going on longer than I realized. That evening, I noticed something new outside. A small lawn sign had appeared near the corner of my fence. I walked up to it and almost burst out laughing. It was bright yellow, professionally printed, and read, "Warning: Unapproved modification in violation of flow directive. Report to HOA immediately." There was even a QR code at the bottom. I scanned it. It led to a complaint form titled Disruption Report, Unauthorized Gate Use. She made a Google form. I took a photo of the sign and added it to the neighborhood chat. Captioned it, "Guess who's starting her own Department of Transportation?" That post alone got more reactions than anything I'd ever shared. The tide was turning. Karen was overreaching, and people were beginning to enjoy watching her slip. Of course, she didn't stop. 2 days later, I got a knock on the door. I opened it to find 2 men in polos and khakis standing on my porch. HOA enforcers. One of them was Jerry, a former accountant with the personality of expired yogurt. The other was Chad, a younger guy who had joined the HOA last year because it looked good on applications. Neither of them looked happy to be there. "Mr. Langford," Jerry began, reading from a clipboard, "we've received multiple reports of unsafe structures being erected on your property. We're here to inspect the modifications made to your front gate." "Do you have a warrant?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "No, but under HOA charter." "No legal standing," I interrupted. "HOAs can't enter private property without consent. You're free to observe from the sidewalk." They glanced at each other, then back at the gate. Jerry squinted. "What is that? Some kind of trap? Wouldn't you like to know? Karen said you locked her in. She drove onto my property without permission. Twice. I have the footage. If you'd like, I can forward it to your phones right now." Chad cleared his throat and muttered, "I think we're good here." They backed off without much more fuss. I watched them retreat to Karen's driveway, where she stood holding a clipboard like a suburban war general awaiting a report from the front lines. She caught my eye, raised her chin, and waved with exaggerated confidence, as if this was her domain and I was just a tenant squatting in her kingdom. I waved back, equally theatrical. The performance was escalating. But things took a turn when I got the notice from the city. Apparently, Karen had filed a formal complaint with the local zoning office. Claimed I had installed a mechanical hazard without proper permitting. Claimed it was a vehicular snare with the potential to cause whiplash, emotional trauma, and civic chaos. Civic chaos. I had to hand it to her. She knew how to write a scary-sounding sentence. The city inspector who showed up was surprisingly chill. Middle-aged guy named Mike, clipboard in one hand, Red Bull in the other. "Look, man," he said, glancing at my gate. "This is impressive. I've seen garage doors that couldn't do half of what you built here." I chuckled. "Karen tell you it was a bear trap or something?" "She said it was part of a rogue militia installation," he deadpanned. "Also said you were planning to install automated turrets." I laughed harder than I should have. Mike shook his head. "I just need to verify it's not a hazard. You got a demo or something?" I pulled out my phone, played the footage of Karen driving in, and showed how the gate closed harmlessly behind her without so much as brushing the SUV. "Everything's pressure-triggered, springs are under regulated tension, locking mechanism is magnetic. I've got the specs if you want them." Mike took a quick video, nodded approvingly, and handed me a slip. "You're clear. Not a hazard. But, off the record, maybe don't tell people you built this thing yourself. Makes the city nervous when engineers have hobbies." He left with a smirk and a thumbs up. I framed the clearance slip and mounted it inside my front hallway, next to the certificate I got from my engineering program. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. By the end of the week, the trap gate, as the neighborhood now called it, had become a local legend. Kids started daring each other to get close to it, parents took photos with it during walks, and one guy asked if I could build a smaller version to keep raccoons out of his shed. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down on her campaign. She handed out flyers at the mailbox cluster. Called an emergency HOA meeting. Tried to get signatures for a vote to have me forcibly removed from the neighborhood. I knew because one of the neighbors, Mrs. Delaney, 78 years old and tired of Karen's nonsense, filmed the whole thing from her scooter and sent it to me. It was the video of Karen on her front lawn, waving her arms and yelling about lawless infrastructure and traitors to community balance, that finally tipped the scales. The neighborhood was done humoring her. The president of the HOA, a guy named Ben who usually stayed out of these messes, finally called me. "I can't believe I'm saying this," he said, "but you've won." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And Karen? She was about to find out that when you pick a fight with someone who designs security for a living, you better know where the trapdoors are. 2 days after Ben called to surrender on behalf of the HOA, a new sign appeared in front of Karen's house. It wasn't handwritten or taped up in a fit of rage like most of her declarations. No, this one was laser-etched onto a polished wooden plaque screwed into a fresh white post. Future site of the Community Flow Initiative headquarters. It read, complete with an embossed logo, a swirling stream of arrows forming a recycling symbol meets narcissism loop. At the bottom was a subtitle in smaller print, Karen Williams, Executive Director. She was doubling down again. Only this time, she'd decided to build an entire fake institution. I didn't react. Not publicly. Not in the neighborhood chat. Not when neighbors forwarded me pictures of Karen posing beside the sign with a stack of clipboards and a smug grin like she was opening a tech startup. I let it sit. Let it fester. Let the absurdity take on a life of its own. And while the neighborhood watched her spiral, I got to work behind the scenes on something far more precise. Karen had made her property the new staging ground for her grand delusion, and as with all delusions, reality was just waiting to strike. I started by digging into local permit record. No sign of anything filed for commercial signage, non-profit operations, or even the new gravel path she'd had installed leading from the sidewalk to her front porch. That was strike one. Then I checked the county business license database. Community Flow Initiative didn't exist. Strike two. For strike three, I didn't have to dig at all. Karen handed it to me. 3 nights later, she held a launch event on her lawn. She strung up fairy lights in the trees, rented folding chairs, and set out a table with sparkling lemonade, plastic wine glasses, and CFI volunteer orientation packet. She had t-shirts made, branded water bottles, and a huge laminated banner draped across her garage that said, "Reclaim the flow, restore order." Only 6 people showed up. 3 of them were her cousins, and 2 others left before she finished her introductory speech, which she delivered via a karaoke mic hooked up to a Bluetooth speaker with painfully loud treble. The last guy stayed because his golden retriever fell asleep on her lawn, and he didn't want to wake it. From across the street, I watched through binoculars. Not out of paranoia, just entertainment. It was like watching a live parody unfold in real time. Her speech was filled with phrases like citizen compliance clusters, neighborhood mobility systems, and vehicular equity initiatives. It was like someone had fed a thesaurus into a garbage disposal and taped the results to a podium. After the event fizzled out, she walked over to my side of the street with a stack of mandatory compliance forms and started slipping them into mailboxes. When she reached mine, I stepped out onto the porch with my phone already recording. "Tampering with mailboxes is a federal offense," I said, calm as ever. She froze with 1 foot on my lawn. "It's not mail. It's a directive. Still illegal." She looked like she wanted to throw the papers at me but remembered the cameras. Without a word, she yanked the form back out and stormed off. But not before I zoomed in on the form she'd left in Mrs. Delaney's box. The heading said, CFI Vehicle Flow Compliance Agreement, and the third bullet point was a demand that residents avoid obstructive personal property at all costs, including, but not limited to gates, planters, large vehicles, and protest signage. That last part made me laugh. She was already trying to write her own version of martial law. The next morning, I filed 2 complaints, one with the city zoning office and one with the state attorney general's office, citing fraudulent documentation and unauthorized governance activities. I included the video of her placing forms in mailboxes, copies of the flyers, and screenshots of her public Facebook post where she referred to herself as acting municipal liaison. But that wasn't the twist. That was just the setup. The twist came when I got an unexpected knock on my door that afternoon. It wasn't Karen. It was a man in a navy suit and a woman in business casual, both carrying briefcases and looking entirely too professional for our cul-de-sac. They introduced themselves as investigators from the State Office of Regulatory Affairs. Apparently, mine wasn't the only complaint they'd received. 3 others had arrived that week, anonymous but detailed and all pointing to Karen's bizarre CFI operation. "Do you mind if we take a look around?" the woman asked. "Be my guest," I said, opening the gate and letting them in. "And if you're interested in some homemade documentation, I have 10 hours of footage and a working spreadsheet of every fake title she's assigned herself since April." They were polite, thorough, and increasingly amused. One of them even chuckled when he read Karen's QR-coded signage, shaking his head like he couldn't believe this was real life. They spent 20 minutes surveying the neighborhood, talking to a few residents, and jotting down notes. Then they headed across the street to pay Karen a visit. I watched from behind my kitchen window as the woman showed her credentials and began asking questions. Karen looked thrown. She tried to play it off, laughing too loud and gesturing at the banner like it was a joke. But the man wasn't laughing. He pulled out one of her flyers and pointed to the line that read, "Non-compliance may result in property access restrictions." Karen's smile faltered. Then she crossed her arms and started pointing toward my house. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I didn't need to. Blame shifting is Karen's favorite form of cardio. Unfortunately for her, the investigators weren't buying it. After 10 more minutes, they left. She stayed on her porch, fuming. The next day, her sign disappeared. So did the banner and the QR code post. But the real damage had already been done. Word spread fast. People started knocking on my door, asking what exactly Karen had done and whether she was going to get arrested. I played it cool, said I didn't know, and reminded them all that I had nothing to do with it. That weekend, Karen tried one last trick. She invited the HOA board to her house for a private session. She parked them on her patio, gave them lemonade, and begged them to back her up. According to one of the board members, "Rick, who liked me more than he liked conflict," she cried. Actual tears. Said I was ruining her vision. Said she was being strategically persecuted by a coalition of lawn anarchists. Rick texted me that exact quote. What Karen didn't know was that her little get-together was being filmed. Not by me. By Mrs. Delaney. The old lady had installed a new security camera facing the cul-de-sac, and it had captured Karen's entire monologue, including the part where she whispered, "I don't care what the law says. I'll just create new policy." She didn't notice the blinking red light. But the whole neighborhood did when Mrs. Delaney uploaded the footage to the chat under the caption, "Neighborhood Napoleon loses it." By Monday, Ben called another emergency meeting, this time not at Karen's house, but at the clubhouse. Karen wasn't invited. The agenda? A vote to strip her of all self-appointed HOA-adjacent roles and to officially bar residents from issuing policy under the guise of the HOA without documented approval. It passed unanimously. I woke up at 6:13 a.m. to the unmistakable sound of a diesel engine idling outside my window. Not the postman, not a neighbor's landscaping crew. No, this was something different. I pulled on a hoodie and stepped out to find a flatbed tow truck parked right in front of my house. The driver stood beside it, arms crossed, confused and waiting. At his feet was a laminated tag stuck to my mailbox with duct tape. It read, "Unauthorized vehicle blocking community access, removal ordered by CFI." I stared at it for a moment, half awake, then at the tow truck driver, who shrugged like he knew this whole situation smelled like suburban garbage fire. "You call this in?" he asked. "Nope," I replied, picking the tag off the mailbox. "But I can guess who did." I pointed across the street. There sat Karen in her bathrobe on a folding chair, sipping coffee like she was watching her roses bloom. When she caught sight of me and the driver talking, she waved as if this was some routine maintenance call she'd kindly arranged. I held up the laminated notice and called out, "Is this your version of a parking ticket now?" She didn't even flinch. "You were warned. The vehicle impedes sightlines to community entrances. It's a hazard." "The vehicle in question?" "My pickup truck, parked legally in my own driveway." The tow guy looked down at the tag again, then back at me. "She said she was city code enforcement." "She's not," I said flatly. "She's Karen with a printer and a dream." That earned a laugh. He handed me the paperwork she'd tried to forge, a mock-up of a CFI tow authorization form complete with a fake city seal, a barcode that linked to a Rick Astley video on YouTube, no joke, and a line at the bottom stating, "This is a legally binding declaration under Order 38B of the Neighborhood Flow Doctrine." "I'm guessing I should go?" he asked. "Unless you want to be part of a civil lawsuit, yeah," I said. "Thanks for playing." He nodded, climbed back into his truck, and peeled off, the hydraulic lift whining in protest. Karen, from across the street, looked outraged. Her cup of coffee wobbled in her hand. She jumped to her feet and started storming toward me. "You're interfering with enforcement," she hissed. "No," I said, holding up my phone and tapping the screen. "I'm recording your third fraudulent impersonation of a public officer." "That's a felony, Karen." Her jaw clenched. She stopped mid-stride. "It's only impersonation if you claim you're the police." "Wrong," I replied calmly. "It also applies to anyone pretending to issue lawful municipal orders. And guess who just tried to illegally tow a vehicle using a forged city notice?" That shut her up. She turned without another word and retreated to her porch like a general after a failed siege. But I wasn't done. By lunchtime, I had an appointment at City Hall. I printed every fake notice Karen had issued over the last 2 weeks. Screenshots, documents, even her ridiculous, "Do not park here" sidewalk chalk messages written in pink cursive. I dropped them off with a code compliance officer who'd been on the fence about investigating her further. After seeing the forged seal and the neighborhood flow doctrine, he changed his tune. "All right," he said, setting the papers down slowly. "We're moving this up the chain." "Glad to hear it," I said. "If you need video, I've got more angles than a crime series recap." I wasn't joking. My outdoor cams, my neighbor's doorbell footage, Mrs. Delaney's scooter cam. It was all archived and time-stamped. But Karen didn't stop. That evening, as I was unwinding with a drink on the porch, I saw her return with a clipboard in one hand and her nephew, some gangly teenager in a neon vest, in the other. Together, they marched from house to house placing what she now called CFI-compliance citations under everyone's welcome mats. New language this time. In violation of Quiet Pathway Ordinance, unbalanced decorative distribution, and my personal favorite, excessive solar reflection. One poor guy got fined for his garden globe. The silver one. You know, the kind grandmas love. I saw her coming toward my property again, clipboard ready. She was about to walk onto my grass when I triggered the trap gate, not on her SUV this time, but on foot. It had a silent mode now. She stepped through, and the gate clicked shut behind her. "Lock." She froze. "Let me out," she demanded. I strolled up, phone in hand, completely relaxed. "You're trespassing again. Want me to call someone?" "You wouldn't dare." "I would," I said, casually dialing. She panicked. "It's just a notice. It's not even real." "Ah," I said, tilting my head. "But I thought you were the executive director of community traffic compliance?" She fumed, eyes twitching as she realized her own nonsense was now being used against her in real time. I finally let her out, but not before taking a picture. Not for the internet. For the city investigators. I wanted them to see her hand-delivering fraudulent notices in broad daylight. 2 days later, the hammer fell. A black SUV with government plates rolled into the neighborhood. 2 city attorneys and a zoning officer stepped out. I didn't even have to walk over. They went straight to Karen's door. She answered with a smile, probably thinking they were here to shut me down. That grin melted as soon as badges came out. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. Half the neighborhood was peeking through windows. Karen's voice, usually a hurricane, was now a drizzle. Her hands flailed. Her shoulders twitched. Then, like the cherry on top of a very public sundae, the zoning officer walked her out to the edge of her property and handed her a violation packet thick enough to be a college thesis. Turns out, not only were her forged documents illegal, but her new walkway, signposts, and even her community office hours setup counted as unauthorized structural additions. She was ordered to remove them within 5 business days or face escalating fines. One of the city attorneys even cited intent to deceive the public and impersonate government authority. If she kept it up, she'd be seeing an actual courtroom. The next morning, she was out there in flip-flops, yanking up stakes, folding tables, ripping her own banner in half like it had personally betrayed her. No clipboard, no vest, no declarations, just a woman with puffy eyes and a trash bag full of delusions. But the cherry? That came Saturday. We hosted a neighborhood block party. A real one, not sanctioned by CFI, just good old-fashioned burgers, folding chairs, and freedom from HOA tyranny. I brought out a projector and, just for laughs, screened a short highlight reel of Karen's greatest hits. The SUV trap, the compliance forms, her walking into the gate. Tasteful. No mocking voiceovers. Just the raw footage, respectfully edited. People clapped. Even Rick from the board laughed so hard he nearly spilled his soda. Karen didn't attend. She spent the evening inside with her blinds closed. But as the credits rolled on my little documentary, someone handed me a petition. It was short. Just a few lines. But it packed a punch. We, the undersigned, move to formally dissolve all informal or fictitious HOA subcommittees not authorized by board vote, and to bar Karen Williams from serving in any representative capacity for the neighborhood moving forward. 17 signatures already. More followed that night. It would take time, of course, proper process, hearings, all that, but the message was clear. Karen wasn't just losing the battle. The final blow came not from me, not from the city, and not even from the HOA. It came from a 12-year-old girl with a papier-mâché volcano and an excellent sense of timing. It was a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after the neighborhood party, and the local middle school was hosting a community science fair in the park just down the hill. Half the cul-de-sac had turned out for it, families with lawn chairs, kids running around with cotton candy, dogs wearing sunglasses. Karen showed up uninvited, of course, not with a science project, but with a homemade booth labeled Flow Education Station. She'd set up her folding table again, taped some old flyers to foam boards, and even brought her nephew back, now wearing a new vest that read Junior Flow Officer. I watched it all unfold from a safe distance while sipping lemonade with Mrs. Delaney, who had brought her cat in a baby stroller and was letting it judge everyone silently. Karen's booth had barely attracted any attention until she started calling people over with her classic tone of veiled condescension. "Are you concerned about the decline in suburban navigability?" she asked one confused dad holding a funnel cloud project. "Let me show you how proper flow management can reduce drive time gridlock by up to 6%. The dad just blinked and shuffled away. Then Karen made her mistake. She pointed to little Olivia Wang, the science whiz who'd built a functioning model of a traffic light system using Arduino and colored gelatin lenses. Olivia's display was genuinely impressive. Timed changes, sensors, the whole works. Karen, naturally, felt threatened. "That's cute," she said to Olivia's mom, loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "But without proper oversight, these systems can lead to flow collapse." There's a reason professional guidance is necessary. Otherwise, it's just chaos on cardboard. Olivia looked up from her table with the expression of someone who just got insulted by a cartoon villain. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She calmly picked up the remote for her project and turned the traffic light to red. Then she pressed a second button. From behind her table, a small box popped open and launched a stream of foam in a high arc, right into Karen's face. The park went silent for half a second. Then someone clapped. Then more. Then a full round of applause. Karen stood frozen, covered in foamy soap residue, blinking like a startled raccoon who'd wandered into a car wash. She tried to recover her dignity by declaring Olivia unsafe for public programming, but by then 3 kids had already asked where they could buy a volcano cannon of their own. Karen packed up her booth in silence, dripping foam and defeat. By Monday, the narrative had shifted completely. Karen's attempts to enforce anything, say anything, or even glare too hard were met with sarcasm or outright laughter. Someone, probably Chad from the HOA, had replaced the HOA meeting sign-in sheet with a Mad Libs form. Another neighbor put up a lawn flamingo wearing a sash that said, Director of Flow. She was unraveling. But it wasn't until the actual HOA board meeting that everything truly collapsed. I showed up 10 minutes early to grab a seat. The room was packed. Folding chairs wall to wall. Karen was already there in the front row, flipping through a thick binder labeled Restoration Proposal. Ben, the HOA president, cleared his throat and opened with something unexpected. We're going to begin tonight with a motion submitted by residents and seconded by the board, to hold a binding vote on the future of informal subcommittees, specifically the Community Flow Initiative, and whether Karen Williams shall retain any advisory or representative role in HOA matters. You could hear the air evacuate Karen's lungs. She stood up before he finished. This is an ambush, she declared. I wasn't given time to prepare rebuttals. This entire proceeding violates paragraph 6 of the HOA Conduct Clause. Actually, Ben said, not missing a beat, you added that clause to your own unauthorized documentation. It doesn't exist in our actual charter. That was the first time I saw Karen falter mid-sentence. Rick, sitting next to Ben, raised a hand. We've all seen the video. We've all read the flyers. We've had zoning officials tell us that legal action was nearly pursued. This isn't personal. It's structural. We're cleaning house. Karen sputtered. I've given structure. I brought order to this neighborhood. You brought paperwork, said Mrs. Delaney from the back. And threats. And laminated garbage. That got a laugh, even from Ben, who tried and failed to hide his smirk. The vote happened right there. By show of hands. Out of 32 households represented, 30 raised their hands in favor of the motion. The 2 who didn't? Karen and her visibly embarrassed nephew. Karen didn't wait for the final tally. She grabbed her binder, stormed to the back of the room, and slammed the door behind her. It bounced halfway open again, which kind of ruined the dramatic exit. Someone in the front row whispered, "Tragic flow collapse," and the whole room erupted in giggles. The next day, her house went dark. No porch lights. No flamingos. No QR codes. She stopped attending HOA meetings. Stopped patrolling with her clipboard. Even the Community Flow Facebook page got deleted. The Karen we knew, the one who thought she was a suburban dictator with a badge made of glitter glue, was gone. I'd like to say that was the end, but people like Karen don't just disappear. They hibernate. And a few weeks later, she re-emerged in a slightly more manageable form. She started volunteering at the library's used book sale. No titles. No enforcement. Just a folding table, a cash box, and a surprisingly decent recommendation for mystery novels. We never spoke about what happened. We didn't need to. As for me, the gate stayed. Still fully operational. Still a neighborhood legend. I even gave a tour to a city planner who drove up from another town just to see it. He called it an elegant blend of petty and professional. I took it as a compliment. And the neighborhood? It got better. People relaxed. Kids played in the street again without being scolded for chaotic motion. Neighbors threw BBQs without being accused of protein hoarding. One guy even repainted his shutters lime green just to celebrate. But the best part? Olivia's volcano went viral. Someone posted the foam cannon video online and titled it, Karen vs. Science. It hit 1 million views in 3 days. She was invited to a regional tech fair. Her mom said she's been more confident than ever. Karen broke through my gate for easier parking. So I installed a trap gate. But in the end, it wasn't the steel, or the cameras, or the passive-aggressive signage that brought her down. It was the neighborhood. United. Clever. And very, very done with her nonsense.